Well, that gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All right, we'll just not approve the minutes then.
Yeah. So if you want to call the meeting to order, and then we can.
Thank you, John. We'll call this meeting of the Freight Advisory Council for AMATS to order. Today is August 11th. It's 3 o'clock. Public involvement announcement. I may as well say AMATS committee meetings are open to the public, and the public is provided an opportunity to comment at each meeting. Business items are presented by staff or consultant. After the committee discusses the business items, the public is invited to formally comment. Without having quorum to approve the agenda or the minutes, does everybody have the agenda items in front of us? We just have two main items: the Ocean Dock Road Reconnaissance Study by Kinney Engineers, and we'll be looking at the draft AMATS tip criteria as well. They've been diligently working on it and had a short time to review it, but it looks like it looks drastically different from the first one that we saw. So excellent work by the AMATS staff on that. With those items, is there a lead from Kinney Engineering that could take over the reins right now?
Yeah, I assume you're asking if we're ready to go?
Yes, sir.
Sorry, I got a feedback here. 1 second. All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
So I'll go ahead and try and share my screen.
Let's see, I'm not getting sound here.
Okay, I can see the presentation, Gene.
Perfect.
And just before you start, this is Christine from AMATS. I just wanted to let everybody know that the meeting is being recorded.
Thank you.
Are you guys ready to go?
Yes, sir.
A little bit of feedback.
Are we presenting now?
Yes.
Do you need a couple of minutes?
I'm just having some technical difficulties here. Sorry about that. Yeah, if I could just have a minute here to sort a few things out, that'd be great.
All right. Are we in a position where we can go over the draft tip criteria right now then?
Well, Aaron, are you ready to do that? And then.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Awesome.
Yeah,
okay.
I can.
So I can go ahead and go through my presentation real quick. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. My name is Aaron Jongenalen. I'm a senior transportation planner with AMATS. And I will be going over the draft tip criteria today. So a couple things before we get too far into it. The TIP is our Transportation Improvement Program. It's a 4-year funding program where we put projects in that we expect to fund over the next 4 years and beyond. The roadway projects, non-motorized projects, transit, anything we can think of that's eligible for federal funding we can put in there. So our criteria is used to help rank and score projects to include into the TIP. And it helps to show what projects are helping to meet AMATS's goals, objectives, and performance measures as outlined in our long-range plan, the MTP. So this criteria was released in July at the policy committee for public comment. It is a 60-day public comment period, so we're just kind of at the beginning of it, so we have a little bit of time for everyone to review it and provide comments as needed. 2 things were released: the criteria itself, which I'll get into, and then this TIP handbook that you see, or the guidebook that you see in front of you. This is kind of a brief explanation about, the efforts that have been taken to update these criteria and to give some base background about it. and I just want to go through it really briefly. One thing to keep in mind, the big difference between this set of criteria and previous criteria is we set a base amount of points possible for projects for roadway and non-motorized. So the max amount a project can receive is 100 points. And the reason for that is to keep it easier for people to see how a project is scored just based on the 100. So if it gets like a 60 out of 100, you know it's kind of, you know, on the lower end. And we wanted to make it just a little bit easier for people overall. Okay, so there are 5 major categories. There's safety, mobility, economic, environment, and preservation. And within each of those categories, there are a number of criteria. So I was going to go through those really quickly. So the first category is safety. Not a lot I really have to say about this. I think everyone understands safety and its importance. But what you'll see here is we have one criteria, for example, is improved truck-related safety issues. So this one we really focused on helping about specific areas where we know there are conflicts that exist between freight and other users, whether they be vehicular users or non-motorized users. So as you can see for the bicycle pedestrian project, if you have a bicycle or pedestrian project, you would use this column, this column, and you would score it based on it. So if a project has 3 or more non-motorized crashes in a year, and it contains improvements that help in separating conflicts between freight and non-motorized users, you would score it a 3. All of these are based on data that we have from DOT or the municipality of Anchorage. So the safety one and a lot of the other criteria are very data driven. We also put in here a recognition with this category here that there may be areas where there's not a lot of data available, but there's still a safety concern. And that can come from the public who's concerned about it, and they bring it up to the Muni or DOT traffic engineer, and they review it and they concur that there is a area of concern there, even though there's no data. And we might be able to do something about it before it becomes a big problem. And as you know, one thing that's also new, we started awarding bonus points to projects. This isn't something we've done really in the past, but for freight improvements or truck improvements, you know, if the project makes improvements on a designated freight corridor, it can get bonus points because we're trying to emphasize that that's a really important location to be making safety improvements on. And the other criteria, you know, in here also talk about bonus points in other locations. So for bicycle safety, it's on an HSIP or Vision Zero high injury network. So it's a pretty easy score to do. It's a straight up points. There is no multiplication people have to do. There's no weighting people have to do. It's just go in here and you select one from here or here, and then you see if it qualifies for bonus points. We have heard some comments about maybe delineating these ORs a little bit so it's easier for people to see. So we'll look at doing that where possible. And so we have pedestrian safety, vehicular safety, and then emergency response. One thing to note here about the safety that we really tried to focus on this go around is the idea that we need to make sure we're actually making improvements that are effective at helping to address the safety concerns in the area. And so we're doing that through the countermeasures. Countermeasures is a nationwide idea that there's a certain effectiveness that you can get from doing particular improvements on a roadway project that address a specific problem. And so we're really putting the emphasis on when somebody nominates a project and is saying it's a safety issue, they need to identify what that safety issue is. And if they can, identify what kind of countermeasure from these locations can help address that safety concern. I recognize there's a lot of technical stuff for a member of the general public to do. So, you know, we as staff will probably be looking through whatever nominations that come through. And if they don't actually specifically identify what countermeasure is effective there, we'll probably do that on our end. Okay, any questions on the safety criteria?
This
Hey,
is
can you-
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. This is Rich Heath. Can you scroll up a little bit to show the max points on each category?
Oh, yes. So safety max points, it's 20 for all categories.
No, I meant in safety specifically. So it's 20
Okay.
points max, but there's so many points max for each category in safety.
It depends on which one. So
Yeah, like
truck is
bicycle fee is worth
4.
5, truck is worth 4, pedestrian's worth
Yes.
5. So what determines the max points in each category?
Sorry, here you can, I also put it right here. So we're on safety, so you can see the max points broken down right here as well. So let me.
How do we determine what the max points were for each category? So you have,
That was something we as staff came up with. And we tried to break it down as evenly as possible between each criteria. But, you know, if people feel that these aren't broken down fairly, we can always relook at them and try and adjust them as needed.
I'm just wondering why you've got a different scale of them. So each one of them is worth different amounts. So like what makes bike safety more important than vehicular safety or something like that?
That was just a decision we made as staff.
Okay.
This is Joe Michelle. Richard, did you see that we sent out, that John sent out the criteria in a link in for the members, so you could have so you can be looking at this, you know, the full page, not depend on them scrolling on the screen for you if need be.
You know what? Let me take a look at my thing and take a look. I might have missed that.
It was just in the last 15 minutes or 30 minutes.
Okay, yep, right. I see it. You're right. I did miss that email. I'll open it up right now.
And this is Joe Michelle. If you would go back to the bottom of the safety criteria for me, please. After the meeting, would you be willing to send me an email with the these acronyms, like, you know, what does AASHTO stand for? I'd like to be able just to know where those criteria making books are and are, you know, just so I could look through those and just kind of brief myself on, you know, where those criteria countermeasure information resources would be.
Of course, just a second. Let me, sorry for the scrolling, but I want to, that's actually something, thank you for mentioning that. That is actually something we need to add to the TIP handbook, and I had forgotten to do that, but we should have an acronym section in here so people can look that up. So I will try and get that all put together and sent out something to you guys after the meeting so you can look at them.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, any other questions on the safety? Okay, next one we have is mobility. So mobility is a pretty important thing that we have to address as AMATS. We are an NPO who is subject to federal regulations. And one of the federal regulations is addressing the national goals and planning factors. And within those national goals and planning factors, mobility is a very important aspect of it. So we broke it down into a few separate things: vehicular congestion reduction. Then we have improved truck movement, improved bicycle network, improved pedestrian network and ADA accessibility, and reduced transit vehicular delay. So again, these are pretty self-explanatory, like the safety ones. I don't know if people want me to go through each individual one, but we did try and include things in there, like in the past criteria for you guys specifically, freight was pretty relegated to one location or just a few. We really wanted to emphasize the fact that freight is just as important as any other mode out there, and that it should be kind of spread throughout the criteria in multiple locations, kind of more of a equal footing as everything else. And so we do have truck movement through here, even though, you know, vehicular congestion can help truck movement, but we really wanted to specifically call it out. We do have some penalties as a new thing as well. So in certain criteria, we actually are giving a penalty to projects based on a specific thing we as staff selected. Penalties for the most part in this criteria are related to EJ populations. So those are the traditionally underserved populations, low income minority populations. If a project's going to have a negative detriment on a EJ location, it'll generally receive some pretty heavy negative scoring. So be on the lookout for that. And we do list what negative impacts are, or some examples of negative impacts in here so people can look at that. Any questions on the mobility side of things?
Just for to wrap my head around this, there's a column for bicycle and pedestrian, and there's a column for motorized vehicles. But at the same time, I also see on the, we'll call that the x-axis. On the y-axis under criteria, I also see bicycles over on the road side of things. So that's the column on the right-hand side is specifically for bike paths and pedestrian trails. And then when pedestrians and or bicycles are referenced in the Y column, it's addressing pedestrian and bicycles on our roads and sidewalks.
Yeah, so sorry, I should explain. So this right here, this column is for roadway specific projects. So if we're going to be putting in like a brand new roadway or making improvement to a roadway, so you would score a project based on this, on this column right here. And we recognize that a roadway project can do multiple benefits to different modes. So it can do car and non-motorized or truck or other things. So that's why you'll see in this column, there will be non-motorized stuff in here, but that's because that's what road projects can do. In this column, it is for bicycle and pedestrian specific projects. So if we're doing a sidewalk improvement, or if we're making some kind of intersection improvement, it could fall under here. And it typically is only for non-motorized or transit connections. But I believe we have, when we talk about truck movements, we do recognize that there are conflicts that exist between the modes. So we try and have this in here about separating the conflicts that exist. But the thing to remember here is that what we're trying to do is one consolidated criteria, like a criteria list. So people don't have to be like, well, is this going to be the criteria for non-motorized, or is this going to be the criteria for roadway? It's all the same criteria. It's just scored differently depending upon the type of project that it is.
So if you're doing a roadway project that makes things better for bicycles, you get more points.
As long as it's not, it depends.
Well, the
Because
idea
it's
being
not
that if
just
it meets the
bicycles.
criteria in the bad, if it meets the criteria that helps bicycles as a roadway project in some, like if it has positive impacts on it, it would allow it to have a higher score as a roadway project. Correct?
As long as it's not making negative impacts on other things and the overall score is reduced, yes.
Thank you. So moving on to economic.
Yeah, so this one is recognizing the importance of one thing I want to point out, how the criteria is how the criteria is organized and how the different categories are organized is not in a way of this is the most important one, this is the least important one. It was just numbered 1 through 5. And how the individual criteria is actually listed is not the most important. That was just the first one developed and put in here. It can be reorganized however people feel. So the economic one is recognizing that economic growth is very important for us. And so that comes in with land use. The municipality of Anchorage had their land use plan that they recently did that talked about different growth supporting features. So we added those in here. And then regular land uses like neighborhoods, parks, community facilities, etc. And then we also talk about health equity areas. So this is talking about health and transportation and how they relate to each other. This was developed as part of our non-motorized plan. It actually outlined health equity areas for, like heart health issue areas, et cetera, like that. So it's talking about if you're doing a project in that location that could help address one of those health equity focus areas, you do get points for it. And then we have the freight system identified in here. Utilizing our freight mobility study, talking about the intermediate, midterm, or other projects recommended by the freight committee. And this one is especially noticed. Most of them will get negative points if they negatively impact EJ population areas, environmental justice population areas. Any questions on the economic side of things? Okay. Environment. Environment is another requirement of us and an important thing for us to think about, especially for things like pollutant runoffs, air quality. Those are big things for us as an MPO that we have to pay attention to, and we have to make sure that our projects are helping to address. So we put those in there. As you'll see, for example, storm water runoff, there's points possible for a roadway project. There's no points possible for a non-motorized project. So if a non-motorized project comes through, it would not get any points for storm water runoff. That's why you'll see for air quality, the points are different between these. It's to help offset that idea that, okay, bike and peds may not be able to help with stormwater runoff, but they can help more with air quality. So then it keeps 20 points max possible for the category. We also talk about VMT, vehicle miles traveled. This is a pretty big one that we have to work on because that helps with things like reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And then we have the climate action plan, the Muni's climate action plan, and then we have environmental impacts, so wetlands, etc. Again, it's a big requirement that we have to make sure we incorporate this into our projects. Any questions on environment? Okay, and then the last one is preservation. Again, it's another requirement of ours, making sure that we're keeping the system in a state of good repair, helping with pavement conditions, sidewalks, any of the kind of additional equipment that we use, signage, pavement markings, guardrails, etc. And then talking about utilities coordination. Often we find with projects that when we put a project into the TIP, it's kind of overlooked about the utility requirements that we have in the area. You know, do we need to underground something? Is there a gas pipe in the area? Is there a water pipe in the area? You know, getting that information out sooner is easier for projects to incorporate those into any design work. And then we have resiliency and then improves transit stops. So that is it for the preservation. Any questions on that? Okay, there's a very brief run through of the TIP criteria. So it'll be out for public comment, and then once the public comment period is done, we'll bring it back to the TAC and Policy Committee for final action on their part. And then once that's done, we will move into releasing and, you know, a call for nominations and then getting the TIP itself developed.
This is thank you, Aaron. I do have a few comments. I understand that, you know, there's still a lot of water that needs to go underneath the bridge before this comes out. Will this new criteria affect projects that are currently in the AMATS program? Are all existing projects going to be reevaluated under this criteria, or is it going to be going forward?
No, it'll be any new projects that are added to the TIP. So we don't rescore projects that are already in the program unless there's been like a significant change. You know, the project was a reconstruction, now is a plan or something, you know, a massive change like that. But this is only for any new projects nominated or otherwise that we would add to a new TIP. So any projects that are currently in there, either they are completed at the end of 4 years or they're carried forward to the next TIP.
This is Joe Michelle again. I understand that if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. This is drastically improved over what we originally saw. I do feel that there are certain items in here that, you know, in an effort to make everything score 2020, 2020 down the board there, I feel that there's some things that are in economic that really seem environmental. And I see some items where, you know, you can have it under economic, but if it's clearly something that's environmental, you're basically rating the environmental thing over the 2020, 2020 criterias. You just have it in a different section. But once again, like I said, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and I don't ride bikes or hike too much. So I can definitely say that I'm biased in that comment. We'll get with the Freight Advisory Committee over the course of, you know, after this meeting, sometime before the next meeting, and bang our heads against it a little more, make sure that we, give you feedback in a timely manner. But thank you very much for the presentation.
Yeah, and just so you know, all the stuff you just talked about is perfect examples of comments we want to hear. If people think that the criteria is in the wrong category or the points are a little off, our only goal is to make sure we keep it at 100 points if possible max, because it's easier for people to follow. But not everything has to be 20. It just wasn't up to us staff to say, okay, safety gets 50 and everything else gets 50 split amongst them all. We're leaving that up to public comments or the committees to make the decision on how they want the points organized. So thank you.
For the, I was notified that there is and correct me if I'm wrong, John or Aaron, there is a Citizens Advisory Council working group happening tomorrow from 10 to noon. That's kind of going to be banging their heads against this as well.
Yes, there'll be the AMATS Community Advisory Committee will be getting together to do a 2-hour-long review where I'll be talking in depth about each individual criteria in a little more detail and kind of working with them so they can answer or ask their questions, and I can try to answer them if possible.
Would I be able to attend said meeting, or would it be, just as a member of the public?
Yeah, you would be a member of the public, but it's just a work session, so there's no approval happening or anything like there. So everyone is welcome to attend. I believe the link is on the AMATS website to the work session. Correct me if I'm wrong, Christine or John.
It's up there.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll be actively involved in this, and thank you for the presentation. If at this moment in time, is there any member of the public that would like to make a comment or ask a question before we move on? Who would be the person who would tell me that there's no comments from the public?
Christine would, I believe. Are we tracking participation of the public, Christine?
Everybody's on the meeting, so they could unmute and speak if they like. There's no messages in chat.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Are there any more comment? I guess any other comments on this? Otherwise, we're gonna move back up the agenda and go for the Kinney Road study. The Ocean Dock Road study. All right, thank you. Kinney Engineering, feel free to seize our screens and let's move to the next one.
Yeah, can everybody hear me? This is Galen with DOT.
Yes.
All right. So I'm gonna turn my camera on here. All right, so just to confirm again, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right, very good. So hi, my name is Galen Jones, and I'm a project manager in the Alaska Department of Transportation Preliminary Design section. And we've hired Kinney Engineering to perform a reconnaissance engineering study on Ocean Dock Road in the Ship Creek and Port area just north of downtown. The study was originally included in the AMATS 2019 to 2022 TIP as the Port of Alaska Multimodal Improvement Study. And at some point during the scoping by the original DOT project manager, the name was changed to the Ocean Dock Road Reconnaissance Study. So that's what we'll be calling it from here on out. So our goal here today with our presentation is to introduce the study and ourselves to the Freight Advisory Committee and to give you an outline of the study goals. Joining me today from Kinney Engineering is Jeannie Bowie, the project manager, Jesse Miranda, project engineer, and Joanne Mitchell, the public involvement coordinator. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jeannie and just say thank you for having us, and that look forward to working with you all.
Great. Thank you, Galen. Hopefully everybody can hear me.
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so this slide gives you a view of the study area. We're going from, I think I can write on this, from Whitney Road down here by Ship Creek, along Ocean Dock Road, all the way up to onto the port, Rogers Grave Road. That's the study area for the project. if you remember, we did a previous study that looked at this intersection, Ocean Dock Road at the C Street ramps. And the idea with that intersection study, because of its limited scope, it didn't really get to look at all of these places where the railroad crosses the road. And that's something that we definitely wanted to, the expanded scope will let us look at that, as well as a bunch of the other stuff that we looked at previously. The hope is that we'll be able to kind of hold that study and just expand on it with this scope. But we may find maybe there'll be opportunities to look at something different that we couldn't look at before at that intersection, and we would include that if it comes up. Let me see. So moving on to kind of the scope or things that we're gonna look at, we're looking at safety, freight mobility, like I said, the number of crossings of the railroad over the road, and can we reduce those? Can we reduce maintenance for the railroad and for the road? We know there are hydrology problems that we talked about in that previous study, but we might need to expand on that. And then also we know pedestrians and cyclists, and there's all kinds of modes trying to interact on this road. So we're looking to address all of those concerns. So a couple of slides to give you an idea of the schedule and kind of how we're laying the study out. The first thing that we'll do is we'll be looking at, collecting information and gathering information. So we'll develop a public involvement plan that will specify who our stakeholders are and who will participate in the study. Then we'll start to have meetings with everybody, some field reviews out, like actually on site, so we can get a good look at what's out there and meet people who are there kind of daily or regularly and get their input. We'll do some of our own data collection. And then kind of once we have all of that information gathered, we'll come up with a broad list of alternatives, things that we think could hit the concerns that we've learned about. And all of that will go into the conceptual study. And then we'll take that conceptual study to an advisory council meeting. So kind of the broad list of stakeholders that we developed meeting together and talking through it. We'll make sure we've identified the concerns correctly, make sure we've identified alternatives that will correct those concerns. And then we'll also look at kind of like combining those alternatives into a few discrete alternatives that could address the concerns well, that we'll look at in more detail. So once we've addressed that with the advisory council, we'll go ahead and look at those in more detail. We'll develop conceptual designs for each of those alternatives. That's what'll go in the draft reconnaissance study. And then we'll come back out to everybody and present that study. We'll be back at the Freight Advisory Council. You guys will definitely be involved as stakeholders throughout, but we'll come specifically to your meeting with the draft reconnaissance engineering study. We'll email out our advisory council again, and we'll go to the public. So open house and some public meetings. We'll take all the input from all of those groups and make changes to the study, and then prepare the final study. So that's, kind of the plan and where we're going forward. Here's contact info for Galen and Joanne and I. And I don't know if you have time for comments, or we're ready to hear what you have to say or questions you have.
All right. Definitely give me a holler sometime soon, and I'll be able to get you a list of people that have been operating in that area for quite a while, just to make it easier, names and contact number of all the folks that are along that road. It's quite a lot of trucking companies, and I just want to emphasize as we're going into this that, you know, I always make this disclaimer about, you know, hammer, everything looks like a nail. The Port of Alaska is, you know, feeding Alaska, and, you know, whether or not somebody can make it down to Ship Creek on their lunch break to do some fishing, I feel should take a back seat to making sure that we can get the freight outside of the port. That should be the main priority in my clearly biased head. But do you have any comments, Steve?
No, I'm anxious to see where this goes. I mean, you know, the road connections are, you know, 95% of it is on railroad property, even though it's inside, part of it is inside the security umbrella of the port. So, you know, we will certainly play our part to, you know, to give you what advice we can under the circumstances. But no, you're right, Joe. This is a trucking efficiency solution more than anything else, and we all benefit from that when it happens.
I guess one question I do have is, in your presentation, you will have alternatives. And I guess, is this study going to lead to a project, or is this a study and then after the study is completed, you know, the DOT planners and engineers got to sharpen their pencils and actually, you know, gin something up? Or is that, you know, is this going to lead to potential projects that, you know, I guess, are you guys, you understand the question, I guess?
Yeah, if I could, from what I understand, speaking with our planners over here, is that this study will list alternatives that solve the problems that we hear from the stakeholders, and provide costs, benefits, impacts associated with each alternative, and then we'll hand that over, the document over to AMATS. And I think similar to the study at the intersection on Ocean Dock Road with the C Street ramps, then I believe AMATS chose an alternative there. And so that I would assume will happen again. And then that document can educate their decision-making when adding projects to the TIP. So then what will need to happen is a design project will need to get added to the TIP, and funding will need to be programmed to perform the design, you know, which could take a few years, 1 or 2 years, just depends on the scope of the project and the environmental document, right-of-way needs, utility, relocations. And then hopefully the TIP will also program construction funding, and the amounts of funding that will need to be programmed will likely be based on the selected alternatives from this reconnaissance study. Does that answer your question, Joe?
Yeah, so it's a couple extra steps after this study that we would potentially see a project. Steve, you got your hand raised, then I'll have a question after that.
No, thank you. I just wanted to also make a comment. Maybe the Kinney guys know this already, but I'm assuming Brian Lindemood hasn't made it in here yet. Otherwise, he could interrupt me. But my understanding is that the railroad is also looking at something to do with the grade crossings down here. That is going to require them to modify the track that's already there and reroute it a little bit. So, you know, if you don't know about that already, you might want to pick their brains about that to see how it's going to interact with what you're thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. So we have been working with Brian specifically with some alternatives that they're looking at down there. There was a grant he was discussing applying for some funding there. And then also we added to Kinney's scope, the department added to Kinney's scope, doing a diagnostic team report that will assess the crossing in the Port of Alaska, the one that's up to the north when the road starts to kind of curve to the east.
Yeah.
To the northeast. So yeah, absolutely. That's all going to be included, and we're going to be working closely with the railroad on their existing ideas and things that they're looking into. So
great.
I have are there any other questions before I occupy some more airtime? All right. My question is this a mandatory AMATS project, or would there be any possible state funding for this? I guess, does it, I mean, can a project be partially in AMATs and also in the STIP as well? I'm just concerned about, you know, fighting over Anchorage specific AMATs money because they, you know, that pot's not anywhere close to as big as the statewide pot.
That is a good question. I'm not exactly sure the answer to that. I would suspect that the funding of design and construction would remain with AMATs, but I don't know if it would have to. So I know our planners over here are good at trying to find money between the couch cushions and things like that. But as far as state money goes, you know, we will pay the match on anything because this is a state, Ocean Dock Road is a state facility. But we would definitely be looking for federal funds to perform the design and construction of this. I can't predict the future, but I wouldn't assume that much state money, general funds would be available for that in addition to or outside of just paying the required match.
I'll ask that question of DOT later on, just in the sensitivity of everybody's time, but I just have a concern of, I mean, all the way down looking to that criteria, we got Brother Francis Shelter, you know, Brother Francis Shelter just a couple blocks away. And, you know, that's definitely going to bring up the economic injury zones and things of that nature. So I'm just concerned about, you know, fighting through the AMATs funding over, with other projects versus acknowledging that this is, you know, this is the Port of Alaska that's feeding, you know, the whole state. So that's just my concern, but that's not a concern that anybody in this meeting, I guess, needs to be concerned with right now besides me. Thank you very much for the presentation, guys. I know that there's a lot of water to go underneath the bridge on this one.
Thank you.
Moving on, I was notified that we do have quorum, so I'm going to move up the calendar real quick and ask for an approval of the agenda.
I'll move to approve.
I can second. All right, with that, we've approved the agenda that we just went through. And can I get a motion to approve the minutes of the May 12th, 2021 meeting?
Joe, can we pull up the, just for the benefit of the committee members, can we pull up the minutes, Christine, and have folks look at that if they want? There we go. Thank you. Hopefully everyone had a chance to review those. I think I sent them out a while back, but
There are the fireworks.
Yeah. Thank you, Christine.
Thank the committee for their patience. Thank you, Christine, for taking the time to scroll through there. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes
I so moved, Joe, for the May 12th meeting.
with, are there any objections? If so, we've accepted the minutes of the May 12th, 2021 Freight Advisory Committee. One thing that, just to hit all the items on the agenda, item number 5, expected actions of the Freight Advisory Committee for 2021. I will attend the Citizens Advisory Council meeting tomorrow and get a much more in-depth knowledge about the proposed AMATS TIP requirements. And I'll be talking to individual committee members just kind of the course of this quarter to see, to mature our comments to the point where we can, voice our concerns. So I'll be working on that over the course of the quarter. And I'll be working with John to identify any other projects that are currently in AMATS that we might have an opportunity to review at the next meeting. But other than that, if there's anything that you guys want to put on the, you folks, you guys and gals would want to put on the agenda for next quarter, make sure you let John know, let me know. That way we have a chance to just mature up the questions that we'll have on the project and make sure that we get the proper presentation in front of us. I clearly can say that the Kinney Engineering presentation that we saw today was very informative, but I definitely called the ball a little bit early. That is as far as the amount of detail that they'd be able to give us ahead of time. So I'll try to have something that's well developed for the next quarterly meeting. Are there any?
Oh,
ahead,
sorry, Joe. I was just going to say, for the purposes of everyone, to put on your calendars, if you would, November 10th is the next FAC meeting at 3 p.m. So.
Okay, that's well outside it's scheduled, but that's well outside the 60-day comment period. Would and I understand it's coming back to us.
Meeting. Yeah, you can have a special meeting just for the purposes of the tip comments. However you want to do that, and I'm happy to help you with that. To facilitate a meeting on Teams to do that.
All right, and I'll get with you later, John, because I definitely want to figure out the funding mechanism for any potential project that'd be working on that Ocean Dock Road, whether it can be considered a little bit more of a statewide project or not.
Sure.
Is there any other comments from members of the committee? Are there any comments from members of the public?
Oh, sorry, Joe. I had to click my off button real quick. So you said that the next meeting will be outside the 60-day comment period. So are we going to have? So what's the timeline we're looking at for finalizing whatever comments the Freight Advisory Committee would want to put together for it?
I will be, discussing these items with you guys just on the phone over this course of this next week. After I, sit through this 2-hour slog tomorrow, I'll have much better, grasp of what's going on, and I'll have a chance to compare it to the previous STIP criteria. We are an advisory council, so, we'll just, we'll have a special meeting before the 60-day comment period. But John, this is coming back to us after the comment period, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
So we definitely want to, be in the public comment section, but then we'll definitely have, something to say after it's been batted around by, the public comment area. And DOT is going to have a chance to make, its big formal comments during the public comment area as well. So there will be some fine tuning of this, I'm sure.
Yeah, undoubtedly.
But I mean, if it improves just half as much as it improved from the last draft we saw, I've got high hopes for it. Are there any other, I'll give you a holler later on, Richard, but are there any comments from the public? All right, with that, I will adjourn the Freight Advisory Committee hearing, and yeah, look forward to talking to you guys off the call. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you, everyone.